These three disturbing road trip horror stories are inspired by real events. First, a vulnerable young woman sleeping alone in a desolate lot wakes up paralyzed to find a hooded predator inches from her window, silently working to get inside. Next, a trucker discovers that the heartbreaking sobbing coming from a bathroom stall is actually a sick trap set for Good Samaritans. And finally, a family vanishes without a trace. Make sure you watch until the very end, because security footage showed their van leaving the lot, but the person driving it wasn't the father. When Kayla decided to sleep in her car at a Wyoming rest stop at 2:30 a.m., she thought she was making a smart decision to avoid drowsy driving. But at 4:45 a.m., she woke up to the sound of metal scraping against her door handle and discovered a man with a full set of car theft tools trying to get inside. You talk to enough drivers out here, and you learn pretty quick that the Interstate 80 corridor through Wyoming isn't like other roads, especially that long, empty stretch between Cheyenne and Laramie. It's desolate. It sits at high altitude, and statistically, it holds the highest rate of rest stop crimes in the entire state. But you don't think about statistics or crime rates when you're 24 years old and running on fumes. You just think about closing your eyes before you drift across the center line. It was March 12, 2016. Kayla was halfway through a solo road trip, pushing hard from Denver all the way up to Chicago. She was a tough kid, smart enough to handle herself on the road, but everybody hits a wall eventually. She still had 4 hours left to go on her GPS, but the highway hypnosis was setting in deep. You know that feeling, when the dashboard lights start to smear together and your reaction time slips just a fraction of a second. She made the call that every responsible driver is supposed to make. She saw the green reflector sign for rest stop mile marker 247 and took the exit ramp, listening to the gravel crunch under her tires. She pulled in at exactly 2:30 a.m. Now, a Wyoming rest stop in March is a bleak place. Wind comes tearing off the plains out there, hitting the side of your vehicle with enough force to rock the suspension. It's pitch black, with no city glow to soften the edges. The lot was massive, paved in cracked asphalt, and almost completely empty. There was just one other vehicle out there, a big rig, parked way off in the corner, maybe 200 yards away. That distance matters. 200 yards is a long way to scream if you get into trouble. Kayla parked her sedan near the entrance side, trying to stay somewhat visible, though visible is a relative term when the only light comes from a single flickering sodium lamp near the bathrooms. She killed the engine. Silence rushed in immediately. She checked her phone. 0 bars. That's standard for this stretch of I-80. No signal, no internet, just you and the wind. She locked the doors, listened to the latch click home, and figured she was safe enough for a 2-hour power nap. She reclined the driver's seat, pulled her jacket over her chest to ward off the chill, and passed out. She was in a legal parking spot. She was doing the right thing. She didn't know that she had just parked inside a hunting ground. Deep sleep leaves you vulnerable because it takes a second for the brain to reboot when something wakes you up. Kayla woke up at 4:45 a.m. sharp. It wasn't because she was rested. It was a sound. It came from the passenger side. Scrape, click, grind. It wasn't the sound of the wind. It was the distinct mechanical noise of steel working against steel. Kayla froze. She didn't gasp. She didn't sit up. She just opened her eyes and lay there, paralyzed, listening to someone dismantle her security. This wasn't a drunk stumbling against the car looking for his keys. This wasn't a kid trying to smash a window. Smashed glass makes noise, and noise attracts attention. This was quiet, this was professional. She turned her head slowly on the headrest. The passenger window was right there, just a few feet from her face. A large man was standing directly against the car. He was blocked out in shadow, wearing dark work clothes, Carhartts or something similar, heavy canvas that wouldn't snag on metal. He had a hood pulled up tight over his head, obscuring his face completely. He was massive, blocking out what little light came from the parking lot. But it was his hands that terrified her. He was holding tools, not a rock, not a crowbar. He had specialized lockout tools, slim jims or tension wrenches. He was working the lock cylinder on her passenger door. Kayla watched him through the tint. He was calm. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He was focused on the mechanism, manipulating the tumblers with the patience of a mechanic working on an engine block. He was trying to unlock the door without setting off the car alarm, and more importantly, without waking her up. Think about that for a second. If he wanted to rob her, he could have smashed the glass, grabbed her purse, and ran. He didn't want to wake her. He wanted to slide into that passenger seat while she was still asleep. He wanted to be inside the car with her before she even opened her eyes. Panic usually makes people do stupid things, but Kayla kept her head. She reached for her phone, hiding the movement under her jacket. She dialed 911 immediately. Now, we all grow up thinking that 911 is a magic shield. You call, they answer, the cavalry arrives. That's not how it works in the dead zones. The call connected, but it was weak. The dispatcher's voice was cutting in and out, lost in static. Kayla whispered, trying to keep her voice from carrying through the glass. I-80! Mile marker 247! He's breaking in! The dispatcher came back, confused. Ma'am, I can't get a lock on your position. Can you give me a cross street? Systems fail out here. The GPS triangulation couldn't pinpoint her in the middle of nowhere. The dispatcher didn't know where she was. The police were miles away in Laramie or Cheyenne. That single truck driver, 200 yards away, was likely asleep with his own engine running, deaf to the world. Kayla was on her own. And then the scraping stopped. The man outside straightened up. He pulled the tool back from the lock. He didn't run. He just stood there. He leaned forward, pressing his face close to the glass. He couldn't see her details in the dark interior, but he sensed movement. He knew the rhythm of the car had changed. He knew she was awake. He didn't flinch. He didn't look scared. He just stared into the blackness of the cabin, assessing the situation. He was deciding whether to force the door or walk away. It was a business decision. Kayla realized that if she stayed quiet, he was coming in. The lock was almost picked. She could see the silver scratches on the handle where his tools had been biting into the metal. She slammed her hand onto the horn. The sound blasted through the quiet night, a harsh, continuous blare that echoed off the concrete restroom block. She held it down. She wanted to wake the dead. She wanted that trucker 200 yards away to look out his window. The man stood there for a heartbeat longer, just watching her panic. Then, he made his move. He didn't run toward the highway exit. He didn't run toward a getaway car. He turned and sprinted into the darkness between the parked semi-trucks further back in the lot. He moved like he knew exactly where the shadows were deepest. He didn't stumble. He just vanished into the black, swallowed up by the space between the rigs. Kayla didn't stick around to see if he circled back. She threw the car in gear and peeled out of there, doing 80 miles an hour until she saw the lights of a town. When she finally got to a police station and filed a report, the officers didn't look surprised. They looked tired. They sent a unit out to mile marker 247. They found the evidence on her car, deep gouges in the lock cylinder, confirming the use of professional theft tools. But the real horror story came from the security tapes. There was a truck stop nearby, with a camera that caught a wide angle of the area. The police pulled the footage from that night. It turns out the man hadn't just arrived when Kayla did. The timestamp showed he had been there for 3 hours before she even pulled off the highway. The grainy black and white footage showed him moving through the lot. He wasn't passing through. He was patrolling. For 3 hours, this man in dark work clothes walked loops around the rest area. He checked door handles. He peered into the windows of cars. He stood in the blind spots behind light poles, just watching the traffic come in off the interstate. He was shopping. The investigation linked him to multiple rest stop break-ins along that corridor. He had a pattern. He waited for solo drivers, usually women, usually late at night. He waited for the lights to go out. He waited for them to fall asleep. Kayla's car was one of 7 vehicles he had targeted that night along the I-80 corridor. 7 people he had tested. 7 locks he had checked. The detective looked at Kayla and told her the truth. "You credit your quick thinking for getting away," he said. "But really, you should credit your ears. If you hadn't woken up when you did, if you had slept for another 30 seconds, we wouldn't be taking a break-in report. We'd be opening a kidnapping file." That's the part that sticks with you. It wasn't a random encounter. It was a calculated shift. The man was at work. So remember this the next time you're driving cross-country and your eyes start to get heavy. You see that sign for a rest stop, and it looks like safety. It looks like a break. But you don't know who got there 3 hours before you. You don't know who is standing in the shadows 200 yards away, watching your headlights pull in, checking their watch, and getting their tools ready. Drive safe, and keep your doors locked. When truck driver Shane heard a woman crying in a locked restroom stall at a Georgia rest stop on a chilly night in October 2020, he thought he was about to help someone in distress. But what he discovered when he pretended to leave and watched from the shadows would expose a trafficking operation that had been using rest stops as hunting grounds for months. Driving a rig for 14 hours straight does something to a man's brain. You stop seeing the world as places and people and start seeing it as nothing but asphalt and white lines. Shane knew the feeling well. He was 38, a veteran of the road who had spent more nights in a sleeper cab than in his own bed. He knew his limits, and he respected the machine. It was October 28th, late, just past 11:15 p.m. He was hauling a heavy load south on I-75, aiming for the Florida line, but his body was telling him it was time to shut it down. His eyelids felt like they were made of sandpaper, scratching every time he blinked. The road markers were starting to wiggle in his vision, looking less like paint and more like snakes sliding across the dark pavement. That is the signal. That is your system telling you to park the beast before you hurt someone. Valdosta, Georgia, was coming up on the green overhead signs. He spotted the blue reflector for the rest area and hit his signal. The heavy, rhythmic clicking of the blinker was the only sound in the cab as he guided the 18-wheeler off the highway. He rolled down the long, dark ramp, listening to the tires crunch over the gravel as he pulled into the truck parking section. It was mostly empty tonight. Just a few other rigs idling in the darkness, their drivers asleep in the sleeper berths, oblivious to the world outside. Shane parked far out in the lot, away from the entrance ramp. He set the brakes, a loud hiss of air that cut through the quiet night and killed the engine. Silence rushed in to fill the cab, heavy and thick. He climbed down, his boots hitting the pavement with a solid, heavy thud that echoed in the stillness. He stretched his back, feeling his spine pop after hours of sitting in that one position, and looked across the lot toward the main building. Usually, rest stops at this time of night are grim places. You expect dim lighting. You expect half the bulbs to be burnt out or flickering like they are about to die. You expect trash overflowing in the bins and that yellowish, gloomy haze that makes you want to do your business and get back on the road as fast as possible. You keep your head down. You don't make eye contact. You get in, you get out. This place was different. It was lit up like a hospital operating room. The lights weren't that soft yellow sodium glow you usually see on the interstate. They were a stark, blinding white LED. It looked sanitized. It looked aggressive. In the middle of the dark Georgia woods, seeing something that clean and that bright doesn't feel welcoming. It feels unnatural. It feels like a stage set where someone is waiting for the actors to arrive. Shane ignored the feeling in his gut, telling himself it was just the exhaustion talking. He zipped up his jacket against the October chill and started walking across the lot. His boots scraped against the concrete, a gritty sound that seemed too loud in the quiet night. He pushed open the heavy door to the men's room. Immediately, the smell hit him. It wasn't the usual public bathroom smell of stale water, old mop buckets, and neglect. It was bleach, powerful, industrial-strength bleach. It was so strong it almost burned the inside of his nostrils. It smelled like someone was trying to scrub a crime scene away. The room itself was empty and quiet, dead quiet. The white tiles on the floor were gleaming under those high-powered lights. You could have eaten off the floor. It was too perfect, too maintained for a public facility in the middle of nowhere at midnight. Shane walked over to the sinks, checking the mirror. He looked wrecked, dark circles under his eyes, grease on his shirt. He turned on the faucet, and the water came rushing out, echoing loudly off the hard tiled walls. He was scrubbing the road grime off his hands when he heard it. At first, he thought it was just the plumbing acting up. But he turned the water off, and the sound remained. It was coming from the very last stall at the end of the row. It was a soft, wet sound. Sniffling, a muffled, rhythmic crying. Shane stood there, water dripping from his hands onto the spotless floor. He froze. He was a trucker, not a cop, but you learn a code out here. You help when you can, but you also keep your guard up, because the road is full of desperate people, and desperation makes folks dangerous. He grabbed a paper towel, dried his hands slowly, and walked toward the end of the room. The crying didn't stop. It sounded miserable, genuine. It sounded like someone who had reached the end of their rope. He stopped in front of the locked stall door. He didn't try to open it. He just knocked, a light rap with his knuckles on the metal divider. "Ma'am?" he asked. He kept his voice low, steady, respectful. "Everything all right in there?" The reaction was instant. The crying didn't taper off. It just cut out, like someone had yanked the power cord on a radio. Silence filled the room again. It sat there for a few seconds, thick and uncomfortable. Shane stared at the metal door, waiting. He could hear the faint sound of shifting fabric, but no voice. Then she answered. It was thin, strained. I'm fine, just fine, thank you." Shane narrowed his eyes. He's heard a lot of lies in his life. He knows what a lie sounds like. And the word fine was doing a lot of heavy lifting. "You don't sound fine," Shane said. He leaned in a little closer to the door. "You sound like you're in trouble. Is there anything I can do? Can I call someone for you?" There was a pause, a shuffling sound from inside the stall. Then the voice came back, a little clearer this time, gaining a bit of confidence. "My name is Lorraine," she said. I'm a tourist from Florida." She spun a story. It was a sad one, the kind you hear sometimes on the interstate. She said her boyfriend had gotten angry at her about 3 hours ago. They had a fight right there on the highway. He pulled over, kicked her out of the car, and drove off. She said her phone was dead. She said she had no money. She said she had been sitting in this locked stall for 3 hours, not knowing what to do. Shane listened. He wanted to believe her. But something scratched at the back of his mind. Her voice didn't sound like a scared tourist. It sounded practiced. It sounded older, harder than the sob story she was telling. It sounded like a script. "That's a rough deal," Shane said. "Look, I've got a radio in my truck. I can call the state patrol for you. They can get a cruiser out here in 10 minutes. Or I can call a tow truck to take you to a motel in town. Let's get you safe." Silence again. When Lorraine spoke next, the misery was gone. The trembling in her voice evaporated. "No," she said. "No police." Her tone had changed. It was faster now, sharp, demanding. "Please," she said. "I don't need the police. I just need a ride. Just a quick ride to the next town up. I can pay you." That was it. That was the moment the coin dropped. Shane took a step back from the stall. His instincts, honed by years of dealing with all kinds of people at loading docks and truck stops, were screaming at him now. Think about it. If you are truly stranded, alone, and terrified in a strange place, and a big guy offers to call the police to escort you to safety, you take it. You don't refuse the cops. You don't refuse a safe, documented ride. You only refuse the police if you have a reason to avoid them. Shane took a deep breath, and that's when he noticed the second thing. The smell. Underneath that burning scent of industrial cleaner, there was something else. He hadn't noticed it at first because the bleach was so overpowering. But now that he was standing right next to the stall, he caught a whiff of it. It was sharp, metallic, like chemicals mixed with old pennies. It wasn't a biological smell. It smelled like a workshop. It smelled like danger. His insides twisted. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a setup. Shane knew he had to play it cool. If there was someone else involved, and there is always someone else involved, he couldn't let them know he was onto them. He had to act like the dumb trucker who just wanted to get back to his sleep. He let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. He shifted his weight so his boots scuffed loudly on the tile. "All right, look," Shane said, pitching his voice to sound annoyed, like a guy who just didn't want the hassle. "I can't hang around here all night. My rig is running and I'm burning fuel. I'll tell you what. I'll go back to my truck and call the state patrol from there. You just sit tight." He didn't wait for her to answer. He turned around and walked toward the exit. He made sure to walk heavy. Clomp, clomp, clomp. He wanted her to hear him leaving. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the night air. But Shane didn't go to his truck. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, he moved. He stepped to the side, pressing his back flat against the rough brick wall of the restroom building. He slid into the shadows, right where the light from the parking lot couldn't reach him. He stood there, statue still. He controlled his breathing. He watched the door he had just exited. The parking lot was quiet. A few bugs swarmed around the bright LED lights, making a sharp zapping sound every few seconds. He waited. 1 minute passed, then 2. The door to the men's room opened. Shane held his breath. He expected to see a hesitant, scared girl peeking out to see if the coast was clear. He was wrong. The figure that slipped out of the restroom moved like a feral cat. It was Lorraine. She was small, wearing a hoodie pulled up over her head. She didn't look scared. She didn't look lost. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and scanned the lot. Her movements were jerky, efficient. She didn't even look toward where Shane's truck was parked. She knew he was a dead end. She was already moving on to the next prospect. She started walking. Her posture changed instantly. Her shoulders slumped. She slowed down. She put the mask back on. She was heading toward another lone traveler who was just walking toward the vending machines, a guy who had pulled in just moments after Shane entered the building. Shane felt a rush of cold anger. It wasn't a mugging. It was a hunting blind. He pushed himself off the wall. He didn't confront her. He didn't yell. That's how people get shot in the middle of nowhere. He sprinted across the gravel to his rig. He climbed up into the cab, locking the door instantly. He grabbed his phone before he even released the brakes. He pulled the big rig out of the spot, aiming for the highway ramp. As he merged back onto I-75, watching the lights of that pristine, terrifying rest stop fade in his mirrors, he was already talking to the operator. He gave them everything: the description of the girl, the location, the chemical smell. He told them about the white pickup truck he saw idling near the tree line, engine running, lights off. Later on, the facts came out, and they were worse than Shane imagined. The Georgia State Patrol hit the place about 20 minutes later. They found the operation. Lorraine wasn't a tourist. She wasn't even an adult. She was a 17-year-old runaway from Florida, a victim herself who had been turned into bait. But she wasn't alone. The police found a man named Vic parked in that dark sedan on the access road, watching through binoculars. Security footage pulled from the building showed the pattern. Lorraine would lure a driver in with the sob story, get them to offer a ride, and lead them to a secondary location where Vic was waiting. They had been working that specific rest stop for 6 months. 6 months of crying in a stall. 6 months of using the one thing that makes us decent, our desire to help a stranger, as a weapon against us. Shane is still on the road today. He still hauls freight, but he's different now. When he stops at a rest area, he parks under the lights. He checks the shadows, and he never ever goes into a bathroom that looks too clean. He can still smell it sometimes. That mix of industrial bleach and copper. It's the smell of a trap. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We all think we know what danger looks like. We look for the guy in the ski mask. We look for the weapon. But the scariest things don't look like monsters. They look like people who need help. The highway is a lonely place, and it knows how to use your own heart against you. If you ever hear that soft weeping coming from the shadows, just remember, sometimes the only difference between a rescue and a trap is whether or not you decide to open the door. July 4th road trip turned into every parent's nightmare when one family stopped at a Virginia rest stop for fuel and simply vanished. Security cameras showed them loading back into their minivan, but GPS data revealed they had been driven 45 miles off route into remote woods, where a trafficking operation had been systematically targeting families for over 2 years. This is the kind of story that rips the comforting cover off the ordinary world. It begins, as it must, with absolute normalcy. The date was July 4th, 2017. Dean, age 43. Blair, 40. Madeline, 17. And Alex, 15, were on the final leg of their summer vacation, driving south on I-95 in Virginia. Everything about their world was predictable, orderly, and for the last time, safe. They pulled off the highway at the rest stop at mile marker 112. The time was nearing 6:45 p.m. It was just a short, necessary pause for gas and a restroom break before the final push home. The rest stop's security camera array captured their entire arrival. The routine was textbook. The doors of the minivan slid open. The family stretched their legs, and they walked toward the building. The camera system picked up the sound of a large diesel engine nearby, coughing to life, and the long, steady hiss of the gas pump filling their tank. Everything was exactly as it should have been. The safety of the mundane was firmly in place. The family was out of the camera frame for 27 minutes. At exactly 7:12 p.m., the family reappeared on camera, walking back toward their minivan. They opened the doors, climbed inside, and the vehicle's reverse lights flashed. They had used the facilities, they had fuel, and they were ready to leave. They drove away, and the recorded facts of a normal day ended. Because that security footage is now known to be a lie. That minivan was never seen again on any subsequent highway camera feed. This fact alone is terrifying. For 80 miles down I-95, the road is monitored by a network of cameras and license plate readers. There are no alternate exits. A vehicle departing that rest stop must appear on at least one of those subsequent cameras. The family minivan simply did not. The only possible conclusion, a cold and terrifying piece of evidence, was that the rest stop itself had been compromised. The cameras recorded the family loading back into their vehicle, but the person who drove it away at 7:12 p.m. was not Dean. The abduction was complete before the vehicle even left the parking lot. This was not a random, chaotic act of impulse. This was the result of calculated clinical planning. Virginia State Police quickly discovered that the area surrounding the rest stop had been systematically compromised by hidden devices. These devices were not tracking vehicles. They were monitoring traveler patterns, waiting for the family to become momentarily vulnerable. The rest stop, a place every traveler instinctively trusts for refuge, had been meticulously transformed into a malignant, directed threat. The low, constant sound of the highway, which should have been the sound of civilization and security, was exposed as a thin curtain hiding true danger. The investigation moved from a singular missing persons case to the discovery of a horrific pattern. The family were not the first. They were the third family to vanish from this exact rest stop since 2015, establishing a sickening, predictable timeline of events. When the FBI was brought in, they found a clear, horrifying thread connecting all the victims. The pattern identified families with teenagers, targeted specifically during the summer travel season. The perpetrators weren't targeting random cars. They were targeting a specific demographic during a specific high-travel window. This suggested an intimate professional knowledge of both the highway system and traveler behavior. This was the absolute violation of trust in the highway systems and the complete deconstruction of the belief that public safety is a shared public concern. The family minivan, an 11-year-old vehicle that had carried them on so many predictable trips, became the most critical piece of evidence against the orderly world. GPS data confirmed that the van was driven exactly 45 miles off its intended route. The driver ignored the familiar pull of the main highway and instead steered onto remote, unpaved forest roads. The digital map showed the minivan venturing deep into an isolated, dead-end labyrinth of trees and shadow. This was the exact moment the victims were cut off entirely, isolated and alone. The world had become chaos, far from the light of the interstate. 12 hours later, search and rescue teams found the van. It was abandoned on a wooded track, the vehicle doors unlocked, and personal belongings scattered nearby. The vehicle felt empty and quiet, a stage that had been abruptly vacated. The scene was an immediate, empty testament to their powerlessness. The investigators, however, found the true signatures of the attackers' cold, calculating efficiency nearby. The family's cell phones were recovered from a small, clear stream. They had been tossed there after being surgically wiped and factory reset. Every single piece of digital history, every call log, photograph, or text message had been systematically erased. The attackers had not only isolated the family physically, but had also deliberately removed their digital footprint, leaving nothing behind but a terrifying, baffling silence. The quiet of the forest was absolute, broken only by the quick rush of the stream. The break in the case came when investigators identified two suspects, Ray and Vic. They were former long-haul truckers. Their blue-collar knowledge of the highway, the rest stops, the security blind spots, and the exact timing of highway traffic had been weaponized. They used this specific real-world expertise to systematically exploit a critical vulnerability in the very system they once served, proving that the most terrifying evils are often committed by those who know the territory best. They were not monsters from a story. They were professionals from the road. The family was held captive for 8 agonizing days. Their eventual freedom was not granted. It was seized. Dean, Blair, Madeline, and Alex managed a desperate escape while being transported to a secondary location. They returned to a world that no longer was predictable, where the safety of the mundane was permanently compromised. They had survived, but they carried the scar of those 8 days, the indelible knowledge that the infrastructure of their everyday life, the rest stop and the highway, had been meticulously transformed into a hunting ground. The men who did this were caught and charged. The trafficking operation they ran was exposed. The files are closed. Order, such as it is, has been restored. But the system that allowed this to happen, the network of rest stops and highways, remains unchanged. Think about that. How many times have you stopped at a brightly lit rest stop, pulled off the road to stretch your legs, and felt a moment of relief? How many times have you and your family climbed back into the car, ready for the last leg of the journey, without looking at the faces in the vehicles around you? How many times have you relied on the absolute assumption that because a place is public, it must be safe? Just know this. When you pull off the road and cut the engine, the people who know that highway best, the people who have studied those security blind spots for decades, are not always driving the 18-wheelers. Sometimes, they are simply waiting for the exact moment the rest stop camera clicks past 7:12 p.m.